Andy.
So, Andy, what do you kick it off? I know we all got questions.
We do. Yeah, Andy is a big time businessman, and this captures my interest. So you are currently the co-founder of Energy Sports. Your first, as far as I know, wild success was Quattro Wireless, which you sold to Apple.
Yes, I actually had a business before that.
Uh-huh.
That was pretty successful and did really well. For me personally, it was like my first win as an entrepreneur. So that means that you make less money because you got into it, kind of like being a struggling musician and you sign your contract with the record label and you crush your first album and you make no money off of it until you that next contract, right? But I actually did okay. But it was a company called M Cube out of Boston. It was the worst name ever, literally. Thankfully, it wasn't like consumer facing, but I didn't start it. I came in and worked with my now business partner for the last million years, and it was spelled lowercase m hyphen QUBE, M Cube, and the idea was it was mobile messaging marketing. Yeah, terrible, right? Like, don't ever name that company.
That's confusing.
It's classic, but it stuck. I don't even remember like what our URL was. No one could find us. So Business 101, catchy name. But that was a mobile messaging company, and it was text messaging. But before, this is like Internet 1.0. Mm-hmm. So if you were on Sprint and you were on Verizon, you guys wanted to be buddies. You couldn't be friends. You couldn't text each other because there was no interoperability back then. So we got the bright idea of connecting all the carriers together and creating short codes, which text messaging, SMS, and eventually running messaging, across all the major carriers in North America, and doing billing as well. So like we were a startup out of Boston, and our first like giant gig was we started working with Fremantle with a brand new show called American Idol, and we were running the messaging voting, and we had no idea that 80 billion votes were going to happen every freaking night, and we sucked. The whole thing went down the first night, and they were like, "Oh my god, like the voting's all invalid." And we added more people and more servers, and everybody was sleeping over for days, and it was awful. But it ended up being a pretty cool company. We did text alerts for like Major League Baseball. But the irony, all the money came, back in the day, if you young enough to remember, ringtones, subscription horoscopes, stuff like that. You couldn't just rip a song and make it your ringtone. So
it was now M Cube is better, faster mortgages without the hassle. I just checked.
Diversification.
Yeah.
So you said that you didn't get super wealthy off that company. Who did?
No. I don't know if any of us did. It was around for a couple of years before I got there. So it raised a bunch of money. It sold to VeriSign for $270 million. The cool, interesting part was the CEO of VeriSign at the time was Stratton Sklavos. Is that name familiar in the esports world to you guys? Well, Stratton's the dude who put all the money behind Rick Fox for Echo Fox, which is gone now. But I gave it a shot there, and he bought it, and the business was fascinating because I think we sold it in 2006, and like 2004 no revenue, 2005 no, 2003 no revenue, 2004 no revenue, 2005 $5 million in revenue, all of it in December. 2006 about 75 million in revenue, in 1 year, and then we sold it. It's a pretty crazy run.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Just so recap. We went from 5 to, did you say 75?
75 in 1 year, like all hyper growth, because text messaging took off. Like everybody was, getting suckered into those subscription ringtone and horoscopes, and we were doing, all these alerts and MTV stuff, and we had a bunch of carriers. So it was like hyper growth. I think we went from like 50 employees to about 250 employees, and trying to get people on the platform as quick as possible and give them info on how to run their business. It was really like a total business school case study, fascinating business. And it kind of went down as fast as it went up after we sold it.
My nieces and nephews used to get in trouble for sending too many text messages, and they weren't on the right plans, or they had friends who weren't in Verizon, and I'd hear these numbers and it's like, wait a minute, that breaks down to like 180 texts a day. That seems like a lot. You know?
Do you remember how fun it was when you knew one of your friends was roaming to send like a bunch of one-word texts because it's like each one cost them 17 cents?
That's why this man's company became worth 75 million. A bunch of jokers like you.
I contributed. Yeah, I helped.
It's true. In fact, that was the impetus for starting Quattro. So I went there to VeriSign for like 2 months. I'm like, this is not for me. I'm not going to stay here. And I got the bug now. And once you have a successful exit in startup, you're like, oh, let's go. Let's do this again. It's like a drug. And the impetus was I was looking at my people's phone bills. I'm like, there's no way. This is like a credit card. People were charging everything on these phone bills. All these, you can't have a $300 phone bill. And I remember meeting with Verizon, and they're like, we can't have people look at our phone bill and think it's us that's charging them all this money, even though the Verizon part was like, $60.
Right.
So that's when I started to think we got to have everything ad supported, and the ad networks on the wired web were just kind of starting, and now everything's ad supported. But that was kind of the idea to starting a mobile ad network. That was the company, that Quattro, that Apple bought.
Huh.
That's
I
cool.
ran up a phone bill at one point talking to a girl who was on a different carrier. It was in 1 month. It was almost $1,500.
Just you feel like a rube afterward.
I felt like an asshole. I was like, that's all the money I have.
Must have been some pretty good pussy.
I was just talking way too much, It was kind of long distance.
I love you, booby. No, I love you.
$1,500 for that conversation.
It was voice. It wasn't even text.
It was voice.
Yeah, it was voice. It was just,
What are you doing?
It's not like we were covering anything important. I'm sure it was just like, this is how my day went. This is how your day went. Yeah. What's the weather like? And just $1,500 of that over the course of 30 fucking days. I was just
30 days.
I'm glad that's not a thing.
We had that repeatedly. So when we moved to North Carolina, like this, one of the contracts I had with my wife was that she was allowed to call home. We might have to work out. Like first she'd use her free cell minutes, and then she'd use the 10 cents a minute Sprint plan or whatever. But I wasn't to restrict how often she could talk to her mom and her sister and stuff like that. Cool. Well, even though we set up a long distance plan, somehow that got fouled up. So when you make calls and you don't have a plan, the price is ridiculous. It's like $1 a minute. Meanwhile, my wife is like watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer with his sister together, just like not even talking, just existing on the phone. And month after month, we got these huge bills that I would pay and then call them and contest and be like, look, you've got to fix this. You need to fix this. So in the end, what happened was they did fix it, and they sort of like backdated and fixed the bills. And then I didn't have to pay a phone bill for like 7 more years or something. Like
Jesus Christ.
That's how it worked out.
Came out ahead.
I really needed to call Verizon for 19-year-old me. 19-year-old me was in a jam.
Oh, yeah, no. Phone companies used to work with you if you were in a jam like that. Like they'd be like, all right, I need a new plan. I need to start 2 months ago. And then they'd help you out.
It's similar to, I found out at Apple with the App Store. Like if you'd call up and be like, oh, my, 8-year-old, 10-year-old son just started buying shit left and right and, playing whatever game he downloaded and bought, $2,000 worth of in-game items. Like they're like, okay, like in 1 second, they just wipe it out. The last thing they want is, call your congressman and say that there's some going on.
I've done that with them too.
I could have lied about paying for freemium apps all that whole time.
We had a big app store bill one time. It was, I forget if it was Colin or Hope, but it's not important. In any case, I'm like, this is a GPS app for Australians. Like we didn't mean to buy this. We've never been there. And
I don't know where you're trying to go, mate. But it 30 cents a minute.
It was $30-some for that app, and like you said, they're just like, oh yeah, all right, cool, we can undo all this. So
I was imagine a scenario where they force you to deal with like Australian customer service to resolve that issue.
You're gonna need to call back at 4 a.m.